The original Star Trek ended 2 years too soon, after 3 of the planned 5 seasons, because the show was constantly on air a decade later. Thanks to the constant reruns and a surprise to most people, the number of fans kept on growing. The decision was made to continue the show, this time in animated form. While the first episode was not very good, the episode I'm going to talk about today is much, much better. Yesteryear, written by the one and only DC Fontana. We start at the Guardian of Forever, a character/equipment created by Harlan Ellison for the season 1 episode The City on the Edge of Forever. This is the only time we see this useful creature thing used, and we soon find out why. Captain Kirk returns through the Guardian and says he was exploring the past of Orion, but when Spock appears behind him, nobody seems to recognize him. Not McCoy, not even Birdman. No, not this Birdman. No, not this Birdman. This Birdman. Kirk ignores it and they beam back to the Enterprise, where Scotty also has no clue who Mr. Spock is. Kirk starts to think that they're not just joking, and after a short investigation they find out that the Enterprise has an Andorian first officer because Spock died as a child during the Kahswan ritual. It's a traditional Vulcan maturity test for young boys. They have to survive alone in the desert. Yes, seems pretty logical. They beam back to the Guardian and ask him if they somehow managed to change the history, which they of course had. Spock suddenly remembers that he was indeed almost killed decades ago in the desert during his Kahswan, but thankfully he was saved by his cousin Selek, whom he never met before or after. And after some thought, he realizes that Selek looked just like Spock looks now, today. Spock did travel back in time to save his own life. I'm pretty sure that Doc Brown would love this. That's what I call a paradox. Now, this is when the story stops making some sense. For a moment, I think it's a fault of Dorothy Fontana that she has a problem understanding the concept of time travel. She wrote another time travel episode for the original series called Tomorrow is Yesterday, and that one suffers too from not properly understanding the whole time travel concept. The trick is that Spock this time could not go to save himself because he was on Orion, making it impossible for him to be on two places at the same time. I'm sorry, but the more I think about it, the less sense it makes. The Guardian is basically a time machine. So they have a time machine. They can go anywhere, anytime they want. This would make sense if the Guardian could only open the portal to the specific time in Vulcan history in just one very specific moment. But that kind of contradicts not only the City on the Edge of Forever, where we have seen that he replays the same eras all the time, but also this episode itself, because in a few minutes we will find out that Spock can this time simply say where and when he wants to go, and the Guardian will open the portal for him. So not only do these two episodes contradict each other, there is also an internal contradiction in this episode. Wait a moment, how is Spock actually here? He doesn't exist, right? I mean, he died as a child, which means he shouldn't be able to exist as an adult, and he should therefore not even be able to enter the Guardian. Therefore, he should not prevent himself from rescuing his younger version, and therefore he should exist as an adult, right? Don't you just love time travel paradoxes? Also, why don't the members of the away team recognize Spock? Didn't they establish in the City on the Edge of Forever that the people who are on the planet are not affected by timeline changes? Many of these problems could be solved quite easily. Kirk should be the only one returning from Orion, and when he would start to search for Spock, he would realize that nobody knows Spock. Maybe they could think that he's going crazy or something, and he himself would have to rescue Spock in the past. But Dorothy is a huge fan of Spock, so it makes perfect sense that she had to make him the main hero of the story. Anyway, back to the real plot. Spock gets back to Vulcan and we see a lot of problems. First of all, what is that big round thing on the sky? It looks like a moon, but it was previously established that Vulcan has no moon, Misuhura, right? This moon was also used in the original theatrical version of Star Trek The Motion Picture, but thankfully it was removed from the director's cut. And now we see young Spock being bullied by other Vulcan kids. First of all, how can emotionless creatures like Vulcans have bullies? I didn't know that bullying is illogical. I thought it's an emotional thing, not a logical thing. Second, the words they say can be clearly considered to be basically an equivalent of racial slurs. I guess that racism is logical too. Third, just look at these kids. Are you really going to tell me that these kids are bullies? A kid as fat as this one and a kid with a face like this? I'm sorry, but they don't look like bullies. They look like victims of regular bullying to me. Sarek sees this, but he does not interfere. Instead of helping his son, he actually blames him for his emotional reaction. Wow, Father of the Year. I'm not saying that he should kick the kids' butts, of course, but what about giving his son at least some logical tips about how to deal correctly with bullying? I'm pretty sure that many of the kids watching this at home would also like to hear some tips. Nothing? Okay. Spock, meaning old Spock, introduces himself to Sarek as Selek, his cousin, and asks him if he can stay at their house for a sleep. Sarek agrees. Of course, every stranger who claims to be your cousin is your cousin, right? For logical beings, these Vulcans are not very logical. But he doesn't have time for logic. He has to have a long, boring speech with his son, which can be simply translated as "man up or you will die." During his Kakswan, of course, I'm not suggesting any homicide. Young Spock gets angry and runs to the desert. Old Spock sees him and realizes that he has to follow him or himself because he didn't save his life during a real Kakswan. Young Spock is joined by his pet sailor Chaya, who was described in the original series by Spock's mother Amanda as a teddy bear. Amanda seems to have a bad sense of humor. Young Spock gets attacked by Lematia, this green thing. Ichaya tries to save his master's life, but is badly injured. So Spock has to save Spock by jumping on the creature's back and either giving him a Vulcan nerve pinch or breaking his neck, I'm not sure. But it's a kids show, so let's assume that it was the nerve pinch. Spock is happy that Spock saved him, but he realizes that Ichaya is dying, so he runs back to the town for the healer. He, however, brings the healer way too late, and he has to make the hardest decision of his life. To decide if the healer should prolong Ichaya's life, which would mean a few more days in pain, or to put him to sleep. Spock, to my surprise, decides to release Ichaya from his pain in life because he believes it's the logical way, the way of the Vulcans, the way of his father. Old Spock returns to Kirk, the timeline seems to be properly restored, with one exception, the death of his pet. But Kirk claims that such a thing shouldn't have any real consequences, and they beam back to the ship where they suddenly try to have a funny banter with McCoy. I personally think it's quite inappropriate, but I do get why they wanted to change the tone. I might sound a bit harsh on this one, so you might be surprised when I say I actually love this episode. It does have some problems, so it's not a perfect episode, but it definitely is one of the best episodes of the whole animated series. DC Fontana is a great writer. She is really great with writing character-driven stories, and especially great with writing Spock stories. If you think about that, all good Spock stories from both the original show and the cartoon were written by her, or at least she rewrote somebody else's weaker script. This might be one of the best Trek scripts she wrote, and we can see what she's capable of when she's in full control, unlike TOS Season 3, where her scripts were rewritten by incompetent hacks and she hated them so much she didn't even want to be credited for them. This episode deals with heavy subjects like bullying or death of beloved pet. Quite tough for a Saturday morning cartoon, and from what I've read, the network execs didn't want to do it. Gene Roddenberry had to step in and basically tell them to just trust Dorothy, and thank God they did. I personally love dark themes in a kids show, and I loved them even as a kid. There are way too many shows who treat kids like idiots, so it's very refreshing to see a show which deals with these heavy subjects. But I still had some problems with some aspects of the story, and I said I think that Dorothy, while she deserves my huge respect as a writer, is not very good in all that nerdy sci-fi stuff. I also don't like the way how the Vulcans have been shown in this episode. I absolutely understand what she was trying to achieve. I just don't agree with her methods. I would give this episode 9 out of 10. It's not perfect, but it's very close to perfection. Anyway, as always, those were just my opinions. Feel free to write down in the comment section if you agree with them, or if you don't agree at all, and maybe even think the episode is crap. If you do like these little mini reviews, I do them every week. Feel free to watch any of the previous episodes. You should see the playlists on the screen right now. And if you did like this one, see you next week when I'll do a video on the next animated series episode. One of our planets is missing. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye.